So most move abroad advice teaches you how to choose a country based on logistics, things like rent, healthcare, visas, weather, Wi-Fi. But after living in 10 countries since 2018, I think there's a much more important question that needs to be asked. What happens when the country that once healed you no longer fits the person that you've become? I want to talk about the 5 signs you may have outgrown the country you once thought was perfect for you. So 5 signs. Let's see. I'm looking at my notes. The first one, you no longer feel any general curiosity about being there. You're just like you're tired. You're not interested in learning anything else about about the place. And it's not that you're necessarily bored, or not even that you're not necessarily comfortable, but you're not curious anymore. You don't feel like there's anything new that you're interested in learning. There's always something new to be able to learn about a country, but for you personally, you're just like I'm done here. Um, in general, you start to feel like, I don't desire to learn the language. There's no connection or pull towards the culture. Um, there's no desire to explore anything new. Um, if you live in like kind of like an expat bubble, and every country has one, you tend to feel this way, and just sort of repeating routines without any growth. But that expat bubble is important. If you tend to live in an expat bubble where you don't get to speak to regular people that live there, local people, if you tend to hang out with people who complain about, how this place isn't like wherever it is in the planet you came from, you're complaining about what they don't have in the store or what you can't find, or um, the way people, the nuances of behavior in certain situations, and everything is a complaint. I tend to meet people um, who at some point or another have fallen into that expat bubble. Um, and so I want people to know that there's a difference. If you're in the expat bubble and you're sort of tired of a place, make sure it's not just the fact that you're tired of being in the expat bubble, because there's always other things to be able to learn. Um, but if you're genuinely no longer feeling curious about being there beyond living in the expat bubble, then, yes, that might be something that you might be interested in thinking more about. Number 2, your definition for quality of life has changed. You used to think about things like, affordability, recovering from your life that you had, I'll say in the States, because that's where I came from, um, what your definition of peace is, what you consider to be low stress. Um, and a lot of those things those things can be true for a time, but then you may start to realize that you need a little bit more than just the bare bones basics. This has been my experience when living in several countries in Africa. I lived in Rwanda for like maybe a month or two shy of 3 years. And my experience in Rwanda was very different from the experience I had when I was younger living in West Africa. Both of those places, Rwanda and the countries that I've lived in West Africa, both of them are beautiful places for their own reasons. Um, in a lot of ways, you know, living there can be more affordable. It can be a very peaceful environment, depending on what your definition of peace is. And it can be low stress. Again, depending on what your definition of low stress is. But for me personally, used for me, I started to desire something more than just, I'm choosing my words carefully. I desired to have something like when I was Rwanda, I was really excited about the fact that I had access to all of this super fresh local produce. And Rwanda has some of the best local produce that I had ever experienced having in any of the countries that I had been to. And it was great to be able to order it. A lot of it I could just order online or, make a short trip around the corner to certain stores that had, organic foods, or if there were certain items I was looking for, like fresh kale or Hass avocados. The fruit store that I really loved. It was nice to have access to all of those things. Um, but there was a point where I was just like, I can't, like that can't be the only thing keeping me here. I need more than that. And so when I eventually moved, I moved to Turkey and then came to Mexico. And Mexico is where I decided to make my permanent home while I continue to travel the world and come back. Um, but I just needed access to more. I needed access to more art and culture. I needed more access to creativity. Um, I just needed more things that I needed, like more bookstores, and Kigali has a couple of bookstores which are really quite nice. But there's a bookstore, like a used bookstore culture, that I'm particularly looking for. That you just don't get in Rwanda, even though what they have is great. It's great for Rwanda. It's just not great for me to be able to live in. Um, but I'm glad that I had the experience. I can say something similar for Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia was wonderful for when I was discovering Buddhism. For me, I consider myself to be a lay Buddhist, right? And so being around other people who are Buddhists have a tendency to be very peaceful, peaceful, open, loving people. And I didn't get much of that in the United States. Um, but I had to leave, partially due to the pandemic. Of course, at the start of the pandemic, I'd moved from Vietnam, went to Dubai for a little bit, and then I had gone to Rwanda. And of course, as far as I knew, there were no Buddhists. There were no Buddhists in Rwanda. You're not going to be able to find that there. And then, you get used to the new thing. But I as much as I love the piece of being able to be around monks and people who meditate on a regular basis, and to witness all the ancestor altars that were available. It wasn't enough to keep me there. Like that can't be my whole life. What I need is a place where I can have a whole life. And can change. Once you learn enough, you get enough, then you're like, okay, you know, is this a place where I can spend long term? It starts to feel different. So once you've had enough, I'll say that your soul desires a new experience, that you can do something new. So number three, looking at my phone. Number three, you're constantly escaping the reality of daily life. What does your daily life look like? And so this might apply to you if you're constantly leaving town, you spend more time online, doing a lot of excessive scrolling, you're always dreaming about going elsewhere and never really coming back. You're just kind of emotionally checked out. The things that you cared about, things that used to be fun for you are no longer fun. Um, and you just kind of feel trapped. I can say that applied to me when I was in Rwanda. I had this beautiful balcony, and it's still beautiful. I'd sit and I wish I could take this balcony and the balcony view. When I was in Rwanda, the last apartment that I had, it was this huge one bedroom apartment with three balconies. And two of them were large. Like I could have had a yoga class of like 10 people on it. That's how big it was. And one side was off of my bedroom, and that caught the sunrise. And the other one on the opposite side of the apartment got the sunset that was off of the living room. But that sunrise apartment, that sunrise view, man, that view gave me life. And it was a beautiful place for me to be able to sit down and meditate, because I had missed being able to go outside to certain places in nature, be able to sit just sit and to be able to meditate for a while. And I found that was sort of difficult to find in Rwanda. So when I found that apartment, I was like, wow, this would be a really great place for me to just sit and meditate in the morning. And it was. And I would do that, and I would sit in the sunshine, and I would get a tan, and I would sit and meditate in the sunshine for like an hour in the morning. I don't have any of it now where I live here in Playa del Carmen right now, which is part of the reason why I want to move. But that wasn't enough for me to be able to stay there. That when I had found that apartment, when I found that balcony, that was the dream for me then. And for how long was that? I think I was there probably about 2 years that I was in Rwanda. And I totally loved that place while I was there. But then when it was time to go, there was nothing that was keeping me there beyond the fresh fruits and vegetables, I said, and that particular view of the hillsides, with the sunrise coming, peeking out from behind, and the mountains, the hillsides. It was the most beautiful view. But even I got tired of looking at it. It's not, I don't want to say that I was tired of looking at the view, but it wasn't enough for me to say I love my life here. You know what I mean? Like I needed something else. It wasn't a whole life. It didn't feel like a whole life to me. And so that experience gave me information about what it is that I like and what I would love to have in a permanent home. So now that I'm here in Mexico, I know that when I get my home, I need to be able to have a rooftop that has an excellent view. And then in the town that I'm actually going to is actually quite known for its sunsets. I don't know about the sun rises. Nobody ever talks about the sunrises, but the town is famous for its sunsets. which I'm excited about. I love it, and I just want, like, I need a place to be able to go and sit outside. I really love having a balcony and like space, not like I've seen people in balconies in some European countries, and they're always like these little super tiny, pathetic spaces that sort of overlook these older homes that are just like I don't know. The landscape is depressing. It's like, okay, I lived in Turkey for 3 months. After I left Rwanda, I went to Turkey for 3 months. And while the apartment that I had was on the absolute first floor, so there was no view to be had. But I had been to other places that had rooftops, and it just wasn't as exciting. It was just sort of things that I could see in America. I wasn't moved by the place, although Turkey is also a very beautiful place for very different reasons. It just didn't speak to me as saying this is your home. And so, I'm again in a space where I'm dreaming about being someplace else. Just kind of emotionally checked out. Turkey just felt kind of gray. Like I wonder, was I there? I was there in September, October, November. I think I left somewhere in the first week of December. And in September, when I arrived, it was absolutely beautiful. It was sunshine. The weather was warm. October rolls around, and it's, the sun seems to go away. It's very quiet. And it's just sort of gray. And I didn't care for it. I didn't care for it anymore. So Turkey, I said Turkey could be a really, or really, I should just say Istanbul, because that's the only place I went to. Istanbul is a wonderful place for me to be able to visit, but I really couldn't see myself living there long term. So if it always feels like you're looking for a way to be able to escape from what it is that you already have, that's just important information for you to have. The fourth thing, you're attached to the identity of the place more than the reality. Um, you're more attached to the identity that you develop for yourself there than you are to the reality of the place. And this has happened a lot. When I was in all of the Southeast Asian countries that I went to Thailand, Laos, Myanmar, Cambodia, and Vietnam. I think those are 5 different ones. There was a certain group of people who followed me while I was living there. And some of them were people who were may have been from some of those countries, and they were just sort of intrigued about my adventures living there. And so it was nice to be able to converse with people on Facebook about what I was learning. And sometimes they would give me suggestions about where to go, and they would give me a little further explanation about cultural things that I didn't really understand. And then, when you leave the place, it's like, and you start having a new adventure in a new country, you lose the identity of, Black lady in Southeast Asia. And it's time for you to go on. And you lose some of that audience, which is fine. You lose some of that audience. And so some people sort of get stuck in that identity of being the person who does that thing. You're the person who lives in a Bali. You're the person who packed up and moved to Mexico. And then when it's time for you to leave, you're just sort of afraid because you had all these people who were sort of invested in who you were when you were in that other country. And you got to kind of rebuild it again when you move to someplace new. For some, I don't think that was really my issue. it wasn't an issue, but it is something that I noticed. I wasn't really stuck to the old identity. It was more so just a personal observation that people would drop off. It was, people that I had would have what felt like interesting conversations online about a particular place. And then when you move, those people weren't available to have conversations anymore. And so you kind of build this, social media identity that people get used to. But you do something new as you move forward. For some people, there might be some shame around pivoting to a new place because perhaps you had said you had made this place into this place is the best place since sliced bread. Everything is great, the food is great, and that, da, 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 da. And then one day you're just like, you're over it. You're like, oh God, I can't eat this particular meal anymore. If I go outside and the music that you used to love so much now just sort of pisses you off when you walk outside the door. You're like, God, I really have got to do this again. It's like in Mexico. I'm like the food in Mexico, or at least where I live here in Mexico, is really hit or miss. I haven't really even had a good taco here yet. Really, I feel like I've had better tacos in my own kitchen. I know where to go to be able to get a high quality tortilla. A lot of the places where you get a tortilla here, it doesn't have a good roasted corn taste. But I know a place that does. There's a woman that sells blue corn tortillas, and they taste so fresh. They're delicious. I love it. And it's a woman who sells um, tamales, and she sells these tamales, and tamales generally come in a corn husk when you find it, but there's also a different type of a tamale that they sell in a banana leaf, and I like the banana leaf because they have a much more moist flavor. So I usually get a chicken or a bean one. If she has the bean one, it's usually a chicken or a pork. But anyway, I like it, but I'm just like, my God, is there anything more than meat, corn, and cheese? Like, what else is there to the food here? It's like meat, corn, and cheese with, a couple of different sauces. And if they don't put any effort and energy into the sauces, into the corn tortillas, then there's really nothing there. So I'm really like, I'm not in Mexico for the food. And and as much as I love food, I'm a foodie through and through. I'm a foodie first. But the food here really doesn't excite me, which is kind of disappointing. There's maybe one or two restaurants that I like to go to, and even there, that place is hit or miss. I went once, and maybe first or second time that I went there, and I was just so blown away because everything was so intentionally flavored. Like the sauces were smoky and a little salt, and it had just the right texture and a touch of sweet in certain things, and there was a little bit of cream from the crema. The meat was nice and tender. Um, what did I had chilaquiles, which is a plate of fried tortillas, tortilla chips with salsas. They have a suite of salsas that you could sort of um, choose which one should you put on there. And in general, it comes with eggs. They put a fried egg on it with queso crema, and I think it's cotija cheese. Don't quote me on that. I think it's cotija cheese, like the crumble cheese. And then if you want, you can add like chicken or beef or whatever. I think I put chicken on it, and it was so delicious. But then I went another time, and it was just like, it was okay. So I guess it depends on whoever is in the kitchen. I should have paid attention to the day of the week and the time that I went there, and maybe I would have had a better time to be able to figure out who was cooking what. But yeah, I'm not in Mexico for the food, at least not in here. Now, when I move to Central Mexico, I think I'll have a better experience with the food. Um, yeah, I'm looking at my phone because I don't want to miss the laundry people. They're supposed to come and pick up my laundry, and they'll bring it back to me tomorrow. But I'm not in Mexico for the food. And plus, here in Playa del Carmen, I think I don't know how the food works. Fresh food, like picking up fresh food from a market. But everything is just kind of like half dead by the time it gets here. The fruit is over ripened and it doesn't have a lot of flavor. Things like lettuce, it's kind of old by the time it gets here. The tomatoes, they got to put in the refrigerator. And if you're a person who cooks, you put in a tomato in the refrigerator or the freezer. It kills the texture, it kills the flavor. I care about stuff like that. Some people don't give a damn. I do. I'm like, you want me to eat this salsa, but you're starting off with trash ingredients. I'm sorry. So again, I'm not here in Mexico because of the food, but I want to be able to move to a place where I will have access to high quality farmers, and I can just sort of work either with the store who has a close relationship with the farmers, or I can work with the farmers myself. I think where I'm going, I'll be able to have access to both. Excuse me. Where I'm going, I believe I'll have access to both, which I'm actually very excited about. I don't really need to be a farmer or, grow things beyond a basic, like I said, I wanted to grow a basic Ayurvedic herb garden. But beyond that, I really have no interest in being a farmer. I would rather just make relationships with people who do that for a living, pay them appropriately and be able to have access to fresh food. And then I can cook it the way that I want to be able to cook it. But what was I talking about? People are attached to the identity that they create in a country more than the actual reality of the place. Yeah, and so that people have, they have talked up the country that they were going to, and when they first got there, they were really excited, and they said this was the best place, and it's better than the place that they came from. And tell people, all sorts of things about how their life was so much better and it was improving, until it's not anymore, and you're not willing to go any deeper than where you are. And for some people, it can produce a certain type of a shame. Um, I'm fine with moving and moving on and being excited about where I am and moving on to the next. But I have seen this play out in some other people. Some people have a fear of change, like the change of moving to the country that they moved to was so much that having to look forward to having to go through that change again, because there is a change every time you move to a new place. It's a huge change. I think in the States, I used to think that I didn't move a lot when I was in the States, but then I met other people who never really move at all. But I don't know. When you move in your own country, it's very different from having to pack up and move to a place where, it's a whole new country. You got used to a whole new country. You live there for a certain number of months or even years. You get to a point when you're done, and then it's time for you to get used to a brand new country, brand new language, brand new routine. You might have different plumbing issues. You have, brand new different foods that you have to look at. looking back on all the countries that I have lived in, I have varying degrees of health because of the food that is available to you. Um, and so, your diet, you have to get used to a new diet. You just can't continue to eat the same thing that you have eaten in every country because everything isn't always available and the quality of food is always different. Um, so it's a lot for you to be able to get used to. So I think I made my point on that. So number 5, the place no longer supports the future that you want to create for yourself. So a country can be perfect for, your healing process, whatever that might look like for you. You're slowing down, you're, recovering from what it is that you came from. Maybe you're in a time where you need to be able to save money. Once you sort of get that, you start to make more decisions like, okay, well, I think I want to build a company now. For me, I had decided I had picked up the practice of painting and drawing while I was in Vietnam. And because of that, I decided that I wanted to be in a place where I had more access to more artists, more writers, people who drew, and also to be able to get the supplies easily. Vietnam, it wasn't always so easy to be able to get supplies. And the quality of the supplies that I wanted to be able to get was important. When you are aging, I had left the United States when I was about 40, 41, and I'm 48, about to be 49 in a few days. And so as I get closer to 50, I'm more cognizant of who it is that I want to be at this stage in my life and how it is that I want to be able to age. What is my aging process going to look like? Not that I'm expecting to keel over tomorrow, but you need different things. Like a 30-year-old, a 20-year-old, or a 30-year-old traveler body is I don't care what level of shape you are in. You need different things as you get older. You can be in the best shape of your life. You're going to need things like community. You're going to need things like, healthcare, whatever that healthcare should look like. I'm not even a person who uses, hospitals and labs and doctors and all that other stuff. However, I do use herbs. I do use naturopaths. I do use, functional medicine doctors. I don't tend to use, pharmacists unless there's an absolute emergency. I prefer to use natural things, and I use the support of professionals who know how to live life naturally. And so some countries are more, some countries can provide that more than others. I need to be able to have other peers, other friends, other travelers, other Black women my age who are interested in similar things. Every country, every city doesn't provide that. Some cities you go to, you might be the only foreigner. Like when I went to Turkey, I did this purposely. I went to Istanbul to a particular part of the city called Kadıköy, which is on the Asian side of Istanbul. Istanbul is cut in the middle between Europe and Asia. So Kadıköy is on the Asian side. And that it was more of like a younger, more of like a younger place where younger people lived. A lot of college students and young families. Beautiful place. I really loved it. It was a lot of fun. But it just wasn't a place where, I don't think I really met there were, I may have seen maybe two, like literal two Black people on that side of town the whole time that I was there. Me and somebody else, and maybe one other person. Um, Nobody spoke any English. Not that I don't expect that for everybody to cater to me and speak English all of the time. But like nobody spoke any English, not even a little bit, not even a hi, hello. Like there was no English spoken in this part of Istanbul. Now you go to other, more of the touristy parts of Istanbul, you can find more people who spoke some level of English. But in Kadıköy, no. Um, and not that that was a problem. It was just like, do you want to live like this? How dedicated, like how much do you want to learn the Turkish language in order to be able to fit here? For me, my answer was I don't really see myself being interested in learning Turkish enough to be able to make a life here. And you should know that. Like I'll forever be a tourist in Turkey. Turkey is a great place. Best bread I've ever had. I gained, I had to gain at least 15, 20 pounds sitting in Turkey eating bread. Um, and then, of course, I left, ate less bread, and then, lost the weight over time as I got back to Mexico. But, you've got to know what it is that you're moving to. So if you've got to decide whether or not the city or the country that you're moving to supports the future that you want to build. So does it fit the person that you are when you're aging? And if you're watching this channel, you're probably not a 25-year-old. Do you want to learn the language of the country there? Some languages are a lot more difficult than others. I have a base language knowledge of French that I used when I used to live in West Africa. And plus, I was married to a man from West Africa too. And so part of my life was using the French language. And we've gotten divorced and everything, but over the years, I stay connected to the language through listening to a lot of videos from food creators who create who create West African food dishes that I remember from being in West Africa and don't really have access to it anymore. And can't find in English. So it's cool to be able to have that. And I'm in Mexico, so now I need to be able to learn how to speak Spanish, which I don't really have. I don't really have any proficiency in Spanish, but because I have, maybe I would say in high intermediate proficiency in French, it helps me to be able to hear and understand Spanish. There's a lot of things that are related in both languages because it's a Romance language. And so it just makes Spanish easier. And I can use Spanish throughout the majority of Latin America. Now, when I get to Brazil, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I'm just going to have to learn some Portuguese on the fly, as I often do when I go to a new country and don't really have any experience in it. But even still, with Portuguese, it's also a Romance language. So it's not like it's going to be completely brand new to me. It's not, the structure is very similar. Having Spanish, the French, and then the Portuguese eventually. I would have access to those things. Things like intellectual expansion. I'm a bookstore person, and I love a good used bookstore. And what I really, really would love to have is access to a number of cookbooks. I want to go to a used bookstore and be able to have access, have a collection of used cookbooks in Spanish and English too. But things that will be able to show me how to be able to cook classic Mexican food, as well as perhaps other, cookbooks from other places, in Latin America. I'm hoping that those would things would be things that I would be able to find. Also things like herbal books, um, you know, those sorts of things. I want to be able to have that in my house. I wouldn't be able to have that any place else. In Southeast Asia, Thailand in particular had a few, where I was in Chiang Mai, you can get access to a few used bookstores, but their selection was limited. And I don't really remember cookbooks being a big thing. And even if there were cookbooks, they were always written in of course, the language of the country that they were coming from, which I didn't learn a lot of. And so those are my 5 things that I would say to be able to help you to think about what you would do when you're no longer interested in the country that you're in anymore, or you feel like you've outgrown the place, and how you would be able to tell. Like, how do you know that you've outgrown it really, and not just that you're just having a bad day? Those are all difficult. Those are all things that you should be able to sit down and think about. And so I actually wrote about this topic in my Substack, if this is of interest to you. I have the link to my Substack. It's called Wealthy, Wise, and Whole, but you can find it under my name, Halona Black. It's on, let's see, substack.com/Halona Black. Halona Black, Substack. I'm looking it up. What's the other? Yeah, halona.substack.com. Halona is spelled Halona. Halona.substack.com. That is where you can find me. And so I hope that this was useful. If you have any questions about this process, or like if you're new to if you're thinking about traveling and going someplace, and you have questions, you can leave your questions in the comment box. I can't speak today. You can leave your questions in the comment box, or even if you're a person who's you're already on your travel journey, and you're questioning whether or not it's time to go, and you want to know if you're crazy or not. I can tell you you're not crazy. But give it some good thought. If you move to a place and you thought that was your forever home, but it turns out that it's not, it's okay. It's really more common than most people think. And you don't have to put so much pressure on yourself. You know what I mean? Like, don't put so much pressure on yourself to be able to think or believe that there's something wrong with you because you're ready to move on. To me, this is part of the fun of being a traveler, of sort of living this life, that when it's time when at the end of my own life, I want to be able to say that I have had a number of experiences, rather than just reading about it or seeing about it on television or in a movie. I had real experiences with people all over the world. That's important to me. And I'm assume that for many of you, if you're watching this, that's also important to you as well. So check out my Substack, halona.substack.com. And I will check you in the next video. Have a great day. Peace.